For years, people whispered about it behind closed studio doors, the tension, the icy stares, the words exchanged when cameras weren't rolling. But no one truly understood the depth of it, this quiet storm brewing inside a man who rarely let the world see his cracks. Pernell Roberts, the rebel of Bonanza, the man who walked away from one of the biggest shows on television, leaving fans shocked, leaving producers stunned, and leaving castmates asking the same question: who did he really despise more than anyone? Tonight, after decades of rumors, soft denials, and half-truths, the story finally unfolds. And it begins long before the confrontation everyone remembers, long before the headlines, long before anyone realized just how deep the resentment went. Because behind the bright Western landscapes, the family-friendly smiles, and the carefully crafted image of brotherhood, there was a fracture. One that Pernell never forgot. One that he carried with him through every interview, every refusal to return for reunions, every moment he tried to reshape his legacy. Even as the world kept dragging him back to the Ponderosa, he didn't just dislike this person. He loathed him, quietly, intensely, in a way that shaped the rest of his life. But how did it start? And why, after all these years, does the truth still sting? It begins on a cold morning in 1959, long before Bonanza was a phenomenon, long before the cast became household names. Pernell walked onto a soundstage where men were already practicing their lines, laughing, shaking hands with producers. He felt like he was stepping into a pre-written world, one where he was expected to simply fall in line. But that wasn't who he was.
Not then.
Not ever. He had come from the stage, serious work, layered characters, stories that challenged audiences to think. And here he was, expected to play the handsome, noble Adam Cartwright, the eldest brother who rarely questioned anything, who followed orders, who stood tall and spoke with calm authority. It wasn't a bad role, just not a role he could respect, and that's where he comes in. The man Pernell would grow to despise. The man who would test his patience, challenge his principles, and eventually represent everything he believed was wrong with Hollywood, wrong with the show, wrong with the machine swallowing him whole. Some say it was Michael Landon. Others swear it was Lorne Greene. Some claim it was an executive, one with the power to silence him. But the truth, as always, is far more complicated. In the early years, Pernell and Lorne Greene shared a respectful tension. Lorne was disciplined, steady, the anchor of the set. He believed in the show wholeheartedly.
Pernell respected that.
He didn't always agree with him, but Greene wasn't the problem. Not the real one. Then there was Dan Blocker. Gentle, warm, with a booming laugh and a heart everyone seemed to love. Pernell never hated Dan. If anything, he pitied him. Dan was a good man stuck in a show that limited him.
Pernell saw that.
He saw the way Dan tried to rise above the scripts, the way he tried to give depth to Hoss Cartwright. Pernell may have been frustrated, but hate?
No.
Not Dan, but Michael Landon, young, ambitious, hungry to prove himself. Now that was a different story. There was something fiery in Michael. Something bright and burning. Something the producers loved. His youth, his energy, his ability to charm an audience. Michael was the rising star, and everyone could see it happening in real time. And maybe that wouldn't have bothered Pernell if not for the way the show began to shift. More screen time for Little Joe. More storylines revolving around charm, good looks, and a smile the network knew would draw viewers. And less for Adam, the complex, brooding elder brother slowly becoming a background figure in a show that needed him less and less. Pernell felt it. The imbalance. The favoritism. The transformation of the show from a thoughtful family drama into a bright, polished spectacle centered around youth appeal. And the person the producers kept boosting, the one they kept shaping the show around, was the very person Pernell felt undermined everything he stood for. But was it Michael himself, or the machine behind him? Because here's the twist. Pernell didn't truly despise Michael Landon the man. He despised Michael Landon the symbol. The symbol of what the industry valued. The symbol of what his character was being sacrificed for. The symbol of creative compromises he refused to make. And as Michael grew more confident, more involved, and more willing to challenge scripts himself, the two men clashed. Quietly at first. Glances. Tension hanging between takes. Lines delivered with a sharpness that wasn't written in the script. Crew members felt it.
They whispered about it.
Why do those two never talk between shots? Why does Pernell leave the set the moment they cut? Why does Michael keep pushing back when Pernell raises concerns? But the real breaking point didn't happen in front of everyone. It happened late one evening, after a long shoot. The lights were dim. Most of the cast had gone home. A producer had pulled Michael aside to discuss the next episode, one that centered heavily around little Joe. Again, Pernell overheard it. He listened as the producer praised Michael's marketability, his popularity, the way young audiences adored him. And then Pernell heard the words that changed everything. We're thinking of scaling back Adam next season. He's older, more serious, not what the kids want.
Michael didn't say it.
But he didn't object either. And maybe he didn't have to. His silence was enough. Pernell stepped out of the shadows. Tension coiled inside him like a storm. You agree with that? He asked quietly. Michael looked at him, surprised but composed. Pernell, it's not about me. It's what the network wants. And you're fine with that? Michael hesitated. It's the business. For Pernell Roberts, those 3 words sealed the distance between them. The business, T.O. Pernell. Acting was art.
Och kräft.
A responsibility. To Michael, it was an opportunity. A career. A ladder to climb. And that difference, philosophical, emotional, unbridgeable, sparked a resentment that would last a lifetime. From that moment on, Pernell pulled away. He became colder. More distant. He challenged scripts with more intensity. He refused to deliver lines he found shallow or reductive. Crew members grew nervous. Producers grew irritated. And Michael? He grew bigger. More influential. More beloved. The imbalance became impossible to ignore. Eventually, Pernell made the decision that would shock the industry. He walked away. Left the Ponderosa at the height of its fame. And though he gave public reasons, creative limitations, lack of depth, there was always something unsaid. Why didn't he come back for reunions? Why did he avoid talking about Bonanza for years? Why did his eyes harden ever so slightly when certain names were mentioned? Because Pernell Roberts didn't simply quit the show. He quit the person he felt represented everything he hated about it, and that hatred didn't cool with time. Decades later, when Michael Landon was gone, and Bonanza reruns lived on as nostalgic comfort television, Pernell was asked in interviews if he ever regretted leaving. His answers were always brief, controlled, sharp, and oh, he didn't regret it. And oh, he didn't miss it. And oh, he never considered returning. But one interviewer pushed further, asked him specifically about Michael, about whether their tension had ever softened, whether age had given him perspective. Pernell paused for a moment. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, not bitterness, but disappointment. A deep, simmering disappointment that had lived inside him for years. He finally said, "Some things don't change. Some principles aren't negotiable." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to, because the truth wasn't about petty jealousy. It wasn't about popularity or screen time or ego. It was about Pernell's belief that storytelling meant something, that characters deserved depth, that the audience deserved honesty, that the industry shouldn't reward flash over substance. And Michael, whether he intended to or not, became the face of the system Pernell could never accept. Who did Pernell Roberts truly hate more than anyone? Not the man, not the co-star, but the idea that talent could be overshadowed by marketability, the idea that depth could be traded for charm, the idea that integrity could be sacrificed for ratings, the idea that the industry would always choose the easy sell over the meaningful story. Michael Landon was simply the unfortunate embodiment of that idea, and yet beneath it all, the story remains hauntingly human. 2 men, 2 visions, 2 paths that collided in a way neither could escape. 1 becomes a legend. The other becomes a symbol of defiance. Both leave behind a legacy shaped by passion, conviction, and choices that could never be undone. In the end, we're left with questions that still echo. Was Pernell right to walk away? Did Michael ever realize the weight of the tension between them? Could things have been different if they'd understood each other sooner? Or was this clash inevitable from the moment they stepped onto the same set? And most of all, How does resentment shape a life? Does it protect a person's integrity, or does it cost them more than they ever admit? The truth remains buried somewhere between pride and principle, between ambition and artistry, between two men who saw the world not as it was, but as they believed it should be. A clash not of personalities, but of philosophies. And perhaps that is the real story, one that still leaves us wondering, what do we lose when we choose pride? What do we gain when we refuse to compromise? And how do we decide which battles are worth fighting when the cost is everything that comes after?